When I lived in Oregon, I worked as an IT for a community college. I wasn't getting out until 9 to 10 p.m. by myself. It was a normal day like any other. By the time I left work, it was pitch black and the thick underbrush made it even harder to see. I drove through the town and finally got to the highway that led to Lincoln City to Carnvis, which was a long stretch of empty highway that ran 1+ hours to the forest. After about 45 minutes, I got to the hill that split 2 lanes on both sides. As I accelerated in my tiny lawnmower of a car, I noticed something moving alongside the guardrail. Okay, I thought, it's a deer, no big deal, just slow down and avoid the cute little bugger. I was extra careful because that thick underbrush meant each side of the road would be deep well of blackness that could have any little critters hiding there, waiting to jump into your windshield. Well, before I could finish that thought, I saw a pair of feet. If you're from Oregon, you know the homeless situation is abysmal. It wouldn't be too strange for one of them to be hitchhiking out here. But it was definitely out of sorts this late at night. Well, I decelerated about 65 miles and kept an eye on those white shoes walking up the road. By the time I actually realized those were legs, walking the man darted in front of my Nissan in what I thought was a suicide attempt. I slammed on the brakes, trying to avoid him, and ended up sliding sideways, going 60 miles per hour in the opposite lane while the man ran out in front of me relentlessly. All I could see was his red plaid shirt and his body as he hit the hood of my car. When I came to a stop, he was leaning on the hood, staring directly at me. The primal fear I felt was something I didn't even know existed. The high beams of my car didn't even pierce whatever this man was. It was as if it was a blackness shadow of void of darkness. Then, in an instant, he vanished, gone. I was breathless, absolutely breathless, shaking as I thought I killed someone. I sat in the opposite lane sideways, breathing heavily for a minute or two. I couldn't help but scream at that point and pound on my accelerator to get out of there. I called my husband, screaming and crying that I just killed a man, but that he disappeared and I didn't know what was happening. I left the scene. By the time I got home, 30 minutes later, I was still shaking. I got out of my car and ran to the hood, seeing no dents, no handprints, nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Here's where it got more messed up. The next day at work, I researched thefts on that highway and found that a man rode his truck with his wife and child inside. All 3 died. I highlighted his name and input it into Facebook. The first profile that came up was a memorial for that man. In his profile photo, he wore a red plated shirt. I returned a few weeks later. In that same area where my skids were was the guardrail. Tied to that guardrail was a moldy child's toy, a rabbit. Something is deeply, deeply haunted about this highway. I'm just glad that there wasn't anyone on the oncoming line, or I too would be trapped there along with that man, whoever he was. When I was 26, my mother bought a house. She took me on a tour and I saw the entire house except one bedroom. She wanted me to see it, but I couldn't cross the threshold without feeling something attacking me. I told my mother somebody or something evil died a horrible death in that room, and I would not enter unless it was blessed by her priest. She laughed at me. 2 weeks later, the homeowner before came over to get mail. She and my mom sat down to chat, and my mom mentioned my misgivings about that room. That's when the previous owner said, "That's where I shot and killed that evil man." My mom pressed for details and discovered that 20 years earlier, The woman was home alone when she suffered a home invasion. She was violently assailed, and as he attempted to crawl out of the window, she shot him in the back, letting him bleed to death before calling 911. He was a known perpetrator, wanted for murder in 3 states. My mom had a sad scrub and a blessing done, and then I was able to enter that room. A pretty tame encounter, but one I'll never forget. I used to spend the night at my grandparents' house quite frequently. Their basement is split into 2, one side with concrete flooring, a workshop and outside access, while the other is carpeted, furnished, and used as a downstairs gaming and entertainment area. Separating these 2 sections is an old hollow wooden door next to the bottom of the stairs. In the back of the carpeted side is a bedroom of sorts, with a majorly comfy bed I spend most nights in. One night, I was sleeping peacefully when I suddenly woke up for no tangible reason. Frustrated, I sat up and rubbed my eyes, and that's when I heard it. A deliberate, noticeable knocking sound on the door to the concrete half of the basement. The door being old and hollow, there was no mistaking where the sound came from. I didn't dare to investigate through the dark and open door. I just closed my eyes and pretended it wasn't there. About 6 or 7 knocks later, it stopped. The next morning, I checked that half of the basement, and sure enough, both of the exterior access doors were shut and locked tight. I asked my grandfather about it, and he simply responded, "I heard it sometimes too. Don't tell your grandmother." That was over a decade ago. I lost my grandfather just over a year ago, and haven't spent the night there since. Not nearly as creepy as the other ones, but one time I was walking to my friend's house in the fog, as they asked me if I wanted to hang out with them. I live in an estate, and there are 2 paths in their house, side by side. One is paved and the other is just gravel path surrounded by trees and grass. Because it was foggy out, I took the paved path, as it was more open and felt safer. I have a habit of glancing around as I walk, and when I looked in the direction of the gravel path, I saw a weird, shadowy figure in the trees. It was tall, skinny, and I couldn't see its head. It was tall as the trees, I'd say. It creeped me the hell out. It wasn't moving or anything, and honestly, I think it would have been much worse if it did. Fucking hope it's just a hallucination. I have a haunted house in South Carolina. It's an old plantational house that is abandoned now, but we still own it. One time, we heard something jump off the bed upstairs and footsteps right after. Like a dog, but the only dog in the house was right next to my feet. This sound repeated every 10 minutes for at least an hour. Only after I checked the room did the sound stop. Another time, I was home alone and I heard a loud crash, like something got smashed. I ran to the dining room, and the giant painting above the fireplace was on the ground, very broken. However, the giant nail holding the painting in place was still there, at an upward angle. The strength of the painting was still intact. The only way that the painting would have fallen is if someone picked it up and smashed it. I then thought there was someone in the house, so I called the cops. This giant ex-football South Carolinian trooper showed up, tough as nails kind of guy. He searched through the house with me, had his gun drawn, and was visibly shaken. He dropped his gun twice, shaking. He left shortly after, not finding anyone, and floored it out of the driveway. One time, I was lying in the bed, sick, and there was a closet with an old door handle. It's also really hard to open. It had a giant latch and the wood doors grains against the floor. So here I am in the bed, and the handle starts turning. The door opens, just a crack, but it opened. I don't know how, but it fucking happened. I ignored it and went off to bed, thinking it was a dream, and I was just sick dreaming. Well, I wasn't dreaming, because when I woke up, boom, it was still open. The next day, still in bed, I remember vividly my right hand trying to strangle me. I know that sounds crazy, but I was choking myself and I couldn't stop. I had to use my left hand to stop myself, and eventually I regained control of my right arm, but I'll never forget about just what happened. Same room, same bedroom. Another time, I remember seeing a young girl walk through the halls. She was wearing a blue dress and had blonde hair. She never did anything to me. She didn't scare me. She was just there. She disappeared after walking into the green room, a room with green walls. This house has like 5 living rooms. There's also a graveyard next to the property. Over time, the land was sold off, so we didn't actually own the graveyard. In the graveyard, there were graves going back to the 1700s, and there is a grave of a baby, definitely the original owners of the house. We also got shot by a crazy neighbor, one 4th of July. His name was Willie. Why do I know this? He came to our front porch one time, shirtless, to introduce himself. He had a giant scar on his back. He asked us to make sure to put away the lawnmower because people might try to steal it. The lawnmower was on the other side of the property, hidden. The only way he could have known we had one was if he was wandering our property. Anyways, he shot at us, barely missing my brother in the head. Willie's house burned down shortly after, with him in it. We don't go back there anymore. I've experienced many paranormal encounters at my old house, which I've recently moved out of. Since then, they stopped. But there was 1 or 2 that really stuck with me. I had a very long hallway at my house. One time, I woke up home alone and walked up to the hallway where the bathroom and toilet were. As I walked past my brother's room, I see a long black figure lying completely still on his bed. Keep in mind, he was at his ex-girlfriend's house at the time. I finished up in the bathroom, and as I was washing my hands, I can hear a very loud crash that sounded like my brother falling from his bed. I walked onto his room to check on him to realize he was not there. I went through the whole house, top to bottom, looking to see if someone was home, forgetting no one was there. I messaged my brother and asked him where he was. I read the message, and it said, "I'm at my girlfriend's house." My stomach dropped instantly. The second encounter that stuck with me also included my brother. He called my name, and I walked out and realized he was hiding from me. I looked down the hallway and see the same black figure poke its head around the corner of my dining room and looked at me. No facial features, no nothing. I walked down and asked my brother's name. "Are you there?" And I walked around the corner to find there was no one there. My brother calls out my name and I turn around to see him on the complete other side of the house. It creeped me the hell out. When I was little, I would spend hours in my bedroom alone, playing with my Barbies. On one occasion, I was in my room playing while my mom and brother were in another room playing games on our computer. Every now and then I can hear them laughing and talking, but it wasn't loud enough for me to take serious notice of. In the middle of playing, I heard a loud laugh coming from my closet. I was facing the direction of my closet and bedroom door, which were right next to each other, so I knew there wasn't any way of my brother sneaking up on me. It wasn't a quiet laugh neither, as I've always described it as some sort of witch laughing. I remember when I finally got the courage to stand up, I noped out of my room, went to my brother's room, and being so confused as to why I heard someone laughing in my closet when there was only 3 of us at home. After that, I couldn't sleep in my room by myself or go in there without the lights on. Fast forward a couple of years later, and my family and I has moved to a different house. I would still get some weird vibes every now and then, but nothing that would totally freak me out. I was still scared of sleeping alone, so some nights my brother and I would sleep in my room together, or we would sleep in his where he had a bunk bed. On one of the days where we slept in his room, he slept in the bottom bunk, while I was on the top. I've always had problems with not being able to sleep through the night, and waking up randomly early in the morning. So, on this day, it happened, but I thought nothing of it. While I was trying to fall back asleep, I vividly remember facing my brother's closet and barely shutting my eyes, when I heard the same exact laugh I heard a few years before, except this time, right behind me. There wasn't any space behind me, except for the stuffed animal that was separating me from the wall, so you could imagine how absolutely terrified I was. I couldn't move for what felt like forever, and when I peeked over the edge to see if my brother was messing with me, he was knocked out, snoring. It hasn't happened to me since, but I still think about it when I'm home alone or walking up in the middle of the night.